Okay, hi everyone. Today I'm going to be presenting another source reading on some Mughal military history. I'll be reading from the Baburname, the autobiography of the founder of the Mughal dynasty, Babur, on the Battle of Kandahar. Before I begin reading, I'll give some of the historical context. Here, this is a famous painting of Babur, probably after his life. Uh, he was the founder of the dynasty, but he was not from India, even though the empire was in the subcontinent. After he was in, he originally started in Afghanistan in this region here. Normally, I don't like these growth maps, but this actually helps get the point across. So when during his lifetime, he's actually more of a Central Asian and kind of Iranian prince than he is anything to do with India. He starts here in Kabul, and over the course of his life, which is described in his memoir, he is basically forced out and kind of forced into India, where he goes on a basically campaign of conquest, which he uh, describes as being about imperialism, basically. And the Mughals are, they didn't call themselves that, but they were, the family was, they were Timurid princes, basically. So Babur is Timurid on his father's side. So that's Tamerlane or Timur, the one that has the famous empire in Iran for some time. And then as it fractures, Babur's family is one of these kind of um, offshoots, and so the Timurids, in a sense, don't really go away. They just become the Mughals, or at least one part of the family. And I believe Babur's mother was Chinggisid, so from the family of Genghis Khan or Genghis Khan. And in fact, Babur was Turkic in terms of his writing. So his memoir is written in what's called Chagatai Turkish. So this was kind of the Central Asian Turkic literary language. And although later the dynasty will kind of shift to using the Persian language, and that's where we get many great kind of Mughal Persian works of literature and history. But at any rate, that's the context. Uh, so now I wanted to share the Battle of Kandahar, which is in the year 913 in the Islamic calendar. So this is the year 1507, 1508 in the Gregorian Western calendar. So I'll go ahead and read. And this is an interesting passage because we get a lot of stuff about kind of the organization of the army. And Kandahar, of course, is in Afghanistan. So I'll begin. Shah Beg and Mukim had set up an awning in front of the mountain outcropping, where I later had a building carved from the rock, and there they sat. Mukim's men hastened to come rather near among the trees. All by himself, Tufan Argun, who had run away and come to us while we were in Shari Safa, sneaked up near the Argun's battle lines. A man named Ishkula was coming toward him with a detachment of 7 or 8 men. Ishkula was somewhat ahead of the others. Alone, Tufan Argun faced him. They exchanged sword blows, and Tufan unhorsed his opponent, cut off his head, and brought it Sung while I was passing Sung-i Lakshak. We took it as a good omen. Since this place was in the midst of the suburbs and orchards, we did not think it wise to fight here, so we're skirting the hills. We had chosen a place in a meadow on the Kandahar side of the waterway in front of Kalishak, and were dismounting when Sher Kuli Karavol rushed in to report that the foe was upon us in full battle array. On our march from Kalat, the soldiers had suffered greatly from hunger. As soon as we reached the vicinity of Kalishak, most of the men had dispersed up and down to look for sheep and cattle and grain and fodder. We jumped on our horses to attack without a thought for gathering the army. In toto, the men we had at the time were nearly 2,000, but as I have just said, when we made camp, many had gone hither and yon. When the battle broke out, they were unable to rejoin us, so our men who participated in the battle were around 1,000 in number. Although our men were few, I had arranged them in an excellent formation. Never before had I made such a good battle array. So just as an aside, Babur is quite proud of himself. And this is why the Baburname is actually kind of not kind of, it's a very entertaining and fun read. Under my immediate command, I had a select band of warriors upon whom I knew I could depend, and I had posted them in groups of 10 and 50 under commanders of 10 and 50. Each group had its place to stand in the right and left wings and knew what they were to do during battle. As soon as the right wing, right flank, right side, right and left were mounted for battle, the army moved out, each in its proper place, without the trouble of arraying them, and without the necessity of tuvachis. And then he goes on to describe the battle array, so that confusing piece I just read. So beginning with Babur, although right wing, right arm, right flank, and right all basically mean the same, I use them to distinguish different facets. For example, in the array, the right and left wings, which are called Barangar and Javangar, are not included in the center, which we call Kul. Here, therefore, those separate units are called right wing and left wing exclusively. Then the center, which is a unit all by itself, has its own right and left, which will be called right arm and left arm to distinguish them. Also within the center, the right and left of the royal contingent are called right flank and left flank. Then within the royal contingent are the warriors who form the boy. In Turkish, a solitary unit is called a boy, but that is not the meaning I am using here. I use it to mean close. Their right and left are simply right and left. And he goes on to list all of the commanders, which I think I will elide because it's just a list of names that won't mean much to you all, and it doesn't really, to be honest, mean much to me. But these were the people he had in his army, and he does explain where they came from. So he mentions some people called Moghuls, which could be a Central Asian ethnic group that were called Moghuls, which were unrelated to the dynasty that Babur founds, and it's not very clear without some notes in this edition what he meant. But anyway, continuing with the text, the enemy was divided into two contingents, one under Shah Shuja Argun, who will be called Shah Beg from now on, and the other under his younger brother Mukim. The Argun masses were estimated at 6 to 7,000. That they were at least 4 to 5,000 armed men, there was no doubt. Center and right wing faced each other. Mukim faced the left wing. His forces may have been somewhat fewer than those of his elder brother, and he launched a hard attack on our left wing, which was under Qasim Beg. Before the fighting began, 2 or 3 men came from Qasim Beg to request reinforcements. Since our own foe was pressing down on us, we could not spare anyone. Without hesitation, we charged the enemy. When the arrows started flying, our vanguard was forced back upon the center. When we advanced with a volley of arrows, they wasted no time returning the round as though to make a stand. Someone in front of me called out to his men as he dismounted, planning to shoot, but he was unable to resist our rapid charge and jumped back on his horse and rode away. This man who had dismounted turned out to be none other than Shah Beg himself. During the battle, Piri Beg, the Turkoman, and 4 or 5 brothers took their turbans in their hands, abandoned the rebels, and joined us. This Piri Beg is one of those Turkomans who had come under Abdul Baki Mirza and Murad Beg Bayandur when Shah Ismail conquered the Bayandur sultans and gained control of Iraq. And as a matter of explanation, this is the Shah Ismail that founds the Safavid dynasty in Persia itself. So you can see kind of the connections between the two dynasties quite early on. Continuing with the battle, our right wing had already overrun the enemy. Those at the tip speared their way as far as the place where I have since had a garden made. Our left wing went cascading into the great watercourse far, far downriver from Baba Hassan Abdul. Mukim was directly opposite of the men of the left wing, who, all told, were many fewer than their opponent Mukim. Thank God that between the foe and the left wing, 3 or 4 main irrigation canals were directed toward Kandahar and the villages. They held the ford and kept the enemy from crossing. The men of the left wing, despite their number, held their ground well. Kambar Ali and Tengri Berdi exchanged sword blows right in the water with Halvachi Tarkan from the Argun side. Kambar Ali was wounded. Qasim Beg was struck in the forehead by an arrow. Guri Barlas was struck above the eyebrow with an arrow, which came out above his cheek. At this point, having forced our opponents to take flight, we went from the irrigation canals toward an outcropping of Murkan Mountain. While we were crossing the canals, a man on a gray horse at the base of the mountain seemed to be hesitating whether to come our way or to go the other way. Finally, he went off in one direction. I thought it looked like Shah Beg, which it probably was, and it probably was. Having routed their foes, all of the soldiers went off in pursuit. 11 men, of whom Abdullah Kitabdar was one, remained with me. Mukim was still holding his ground and fighting. Disregarding how few our men were, and relying upon God, we had the drums sounded and headed toward the foe. God grants victory both to the many and to the few. No one has might in the divine court. Many a small band has defeated a large one with God's permission. Quote unquote. Hearing the sound of our drums and realizing that we were charging in his direction, the enemy abandoned his ground and took flight. Thank God. After defeating our foe, we went to Kandahar and camped in Farrukhzad's garden, no trace of which now remains. Interesting things in this. We have a pretty rich description of how this Babur's army formed up, which gets pretty technical, but is as I understand it, he's describing essentially multiple, right, left, center groups of, it seems, primarily cavalry. And this also gets into something, a characterization of this early period of the Mughals as using a lot of firearms. At this stage, at least in this engagement, there doesn't seem to be any mention of gunpowder weapons at all. Most of the army seems to be these kind of Turkic cavalrymen that Babur would have been commanding, with mostly bow, arrow, and lance. We do have some mention of some lances, and we do have a few different tactics of using both missile weapons and shock. So I hope you found this to be an interesting passage. I may read more from this. This is this is a pretty significant translation from a scholar named Wheeler Thackston. He's translated a bunch of these kind of formative texts in this period of Islamic history. So, and it's also, if you want to get it, it's published by the Modern Library, if you'd like to look it up. And you can get it pretty cheap. I mean, I got my copy from a used bookstore, so I recommend you read it. There's a lot more than just warfare. I mean, there's a lot about Babur's kind of travels. I mean, his invasion of India, his impressions of not just India, but also all over Afghanistan and kind of Central Asia, that region. So I hope you found this interesting, and I will talk to you guys in the next video. Thank you.